in the entertainment industry, nobody believes there's such a thing as UFOs for real. They think I'm nuts. I'm going to try to get right into this so we don't waste too much time. I've put this show together. This is the first time I've done anything quite like this because there was a documentary that I participated in that was shot about 3 years ago by Charles Lauzrica. I don't know if any of you have seen Dangerous Days, the documentary. So there's a few little clips of it in here, and because it tells parts of the story that are much easier for me to just show the clip than to tell the story, because all the participants, not all of them, but many of them are here, including my partner, Richard Urasich, of many, many years, who was really a brilliant cinematographer and effects guy. So that can all speak for itself. This movie, if you've seen Dangerous Days, that's great. If you haven't, I recommend you see it if you're all interested in this movie, because it's one of the best behind-the-scenes documentaries that really bores into all those incredible stories that surround Blade Runner and all the difficulties that Ridley had with his entree with American crews. There's a lot of histrionics that surrounded this movie, various versions of this movie, et cetera, et cetera. The restoration of the movie, the Blu-ray that came out recently, is really fantastic because they were able to fix a lot of mistakes. You've probably seen them, the wires are removed from the spinner, and Harrison Ford's son played Harrison, and they stuck him in to fix some dialogue sync in a window scene. The actress came back and put her face on the stunt woman. So there's a lot of things that are actually improved about the movie that were not any kind of a creative or aesthetic violation of the nature of the film, and it's all been approved by me and Ridley and everybody else. So my relationship with Ridley was really excellent, and I think we should have a little background sound here. Amazing director. I got along great with Ridley. He's a wonderful guy, and he's also a terrific artist. If you don't know that, that's probably too loud. But if you ever hang out with Ridley, you're having dinner, you're having a drink, you're walking around, whatever it is, he's going to be sketching on the back of a napkin, on an envelope, on a piece of shredded paper, whatever. He's drawing constantly. So he communicates really clearly with all of us to tell us what he wants to see. He's really a terrific artist. This is some of our crew for the effects crew. I'm not going to name them all, but there's a lot of famous people here who work with me on a number of pictures and with Richard Urasich. This is Richard Urasich on the left, and me looking a lot better than I do now, and the Tyrell pyramid in the back. The pyramid was an interesting thing because we designed that. I kind of created the whole pyramid idea myself. It was the one of the few elements of the production design that was not created by Sid Mead. This is Sid here, that's Ridley, and that's Dave Dreyer. One of the dynamics of our production was that Blade Runner was a relatively low-budget movie, and these are some of the early illustrations. There weren't to be many shots, there wasn't a very big budget, and I was going to have to go on to directing Brainstorm, and Richard Urasich, my partner, was going to go on to be the cinematographer on Brainstorm about midway through the effects on Blade Runner. So we were kind of doing double duty, and Dave Dreyer came in and filled in for us and did an absolutely masterful job of finishing all the work. So this is, very early conceptual stuff, and if you see Dangerous Days, you'll see this whole early ideas that predated the version of Blade Runner that actually emerged. This is much closer to production, the standard kind of storyboards that we would be working on to try to define all the shots and our ideas for sequences in the movie, and I'll describe a lot of this stuff as we go along. So the Hades landscape was one of our first projects to really be the establishing shots for Los Angeles in 2012, whenever it was, 2019, can't remember the date. And we went down to these cracking plants in San Pedro and photographed a lot of these silhouettes of these towers and weird structures that became the basis of the Hades landscape, which was what we call a forced perspective miniature. And I'll describe that in this next clip that's coming up. But this was our first little test of taking some of those photographs, stacking them up, very large in the front, medium size in the middle, and very tiny in the back. You see at the very back there, the Tyrell pyramids, the two pyramids. We only built two sides of one pyramid and doubled it up and shot it from a lot of different angles to make it look like two pyramids. It was all about saving money. And even in the distant shots of the Hades landscape, where you see the pyramids in the background, those were photographs of the larger pyramids reduced in size and put inside little plexiglass light boxes with some neon inside. There really weren't ever any miniature Tyrell pyramids. But this is a nice little sequence. So one of the jobs that I got shortly after I came back from working on 2001, we can turn this music down a little bit, was to work on Zabriskie Point for Michelangelo Antonioni. And he wanted this big epic scene at the end of his movie that was going to be kind of an apocalyptic end-of-the-world explosion scene. And I designed this scene where we were going to shoot L.A. at night, real L.A. at night, not a fake futuristic L.A., but just the real L.A., and we actually set up a 70-millimeter camera doing time-lapse photography up at the Griffith Observatory overlooking Los Angeles to get enough exposure. And then we hired a crew from the MGM Pyrotechnics Department, went out to the desert to an area that you can rent and legally explode anything. And we said, we just want you to make the biggest explosions you can possibly make. It was a completely wild evening. And these guys had these gigantic steel cauldrons, like 2-inch thick solid steel, about 10 feet in diameter and about 4 feet deep. And they would fill it with dynamite and naphthalene and phosphorus, and then fill it with gasoline. And we'd be back there with a 96 frame per second, 35 millimeter camera, a couple of cameras, and they would blow these things up. And we did every conceivable combination of explosions, of big white ones, big red ones, big fireballs. We said, you know, anything short of a thermonuclear blast is going to look good. And so they looked fantastic. And then we started doing some preliminary composites of superimposing those explosions over this live-action shot of Los Angeles at night. And this kind of started like a carpet bombing that started way off in the distance, little explosions, and then a couple more, and they start coming forward and forward and forward. Very complicated series of multiple exposures, kind of like the Hades landscape. Well, Antonioni didn't get it. He didn't like it. He didn't understand it. He didn't have any patience for this kind of thing. He had never done special effects in any of his films, as far as I knew. And I got fired. So all that film just sat in my storage locker for a long, long time until Blade Runner came up. And we said, well, you know, since you don't have any money, I happen to have these explosions wouldn't that look good on the Hades landscape. So that's where they actually came from. And then we went out to our parking lot in Marina del Rey and also had some huge flames. We would test giant bottles of propane gas. We'd light those off and film that at very high frame rates, 96 frames, 72 frames. And also a lot of smoke. We just let off smoke bombs in the dark and lit them from behind, so we'd have the smoke. We had every conceivable size and kind of smoke, drifting smoke, straight up smoke, sideways smoke. And then we also built a big rain machine out in the parking lot with a big truss over our parking lot at night, lit it from behind, and then had rain falling down and shot lots and lots of rain plates. So the smoke and the rain and the fire and the smoke and the explosions all got kind of used in various ways in shots in Blade Runner. So whenever you see that kind of density of atmosphere and the rain and everything, it just really makes it all come together in a very naturalistic way. This was way pre-computer graphics. We had no way to do any digital comping or anything like this. So it is all optical. It's all handmade. And so, you know, these are our little cutouts here that you saw a little bit earlier, these filigreed acid-etched brass with fiber optics under the table. Here's our crew. The table is tilted up here, weaving all this fiber optics back behind these little cutouts, which is going to shine into the smoke and create this layered lighting. And then all this fans and cooling to try to keep the whole thing from lighting on fire, because there was a ton of light under there as well. Here's working on the miniature up on its side. Then the foreground portions of the miniature were not just cutouts. They were actually three-dimensional models. But we made these little molds of little kind of weird city streets and buildings and towers. So these are all actually dimensional, not just flat cutouts, with these cracking towers in the foreground. So there was some more dimension to it. You can see that under construction here. So it was pretty detailed, but it was actually just a bunch of junk. Very easy to, these are all repeated molds. You'll see these same buildings over and over and over and over all around here. So it was just one mold repeated, and then we would do this layered thing. And then you see these little slots behind each layer of acid etched brass. There are holes drilled in the table because there's lights under the table as well as fiber optics coming up under the table, and the camera is out here. And from the camera's point of view, that's what you see in smoke. The smoke is really the magical thing, and as I've said before, the Blade Runner is really kind of the beneficiary of Close Encounters, because we'd worked out all of this smoke technique, all these fiber optics, and all these layered lighting on the mothership and on the UFOs in Close Encounters. So you'll see in this movie that the blimp is really very much like the mothership in Close Encounters. The spinners in Blade Runner are very much like the UFOs in Close Encounters. We use the same lights, same smoke, same lenses, same motion control. And so we were starting to get this kind of thing. And then we had this technique I'll show you in a second about how we had to fit these explosions and flame and smoke into these shots. And it'll come up in one of the next slides of everybody kind of describing how we did that. So that's with a little bit of smoke, shooting it from behind. And here we are. So here's some more shots of the Hades landscape from the side. Here's the 65 camera. This is the miniature. You see all these lights coming from underneath. And then we worked out this technique where the camera is back here, but there's a 35 millimeter projector now in this location that's going to rear project some smoke or some flames onto a little screen here, because we've left the foreground miniature in place. We can move the camera again, so that'll all register. But now some layer here will be at the alignment with some cracking tower. And then there were also little lights that we would put onto each tower. So here you see a movie being projected to fit the top of one of these towers. And this is the 35 millimeter projector, in this particular case, projecting from the front. So this is just a piece of white cardboard, and the camera is right here. And so the miniature is down there, and this had to be done over and over and repositioned. A very scary kind of photography to risk any mistake in any pass would destroy the entire shot, and you have to start over again. So it's extremely meticulous kind of work.
Did you say that there was a practical element on the tower as well?
Well, what we did was, yeah, directly above each tower, we had a little pin light with creating a little pool of light that would coordinate with the flash of either the flame or the explosion. And in the original movie, we made a mistake. I mean, we got away with it just barely because we were about 3 frames off. And the pool of light is not synchronized perfectly with the explosion. That got corrected in the new Blu-ray. I mean, that was part of all the stuff that we were able to fix and pull that back into sync digitally. This is Dave Stewart. He's no longer alive. This guy was one of the master photographers that worked with me on almost every film I ever did. He was totally meticulous. So these are cutouts, actually. These are not real pyramids. These are just flat plexiglass boxes with photographs of the miniatures on them. And then, you got your flames here, all this stuff going on. Sometimes a little bit of rain happening in the foreground, very subtle. So here's the early phase of designing the Tyrell pyramid. This is a big foam core model in the scale we were actually going to build it. And I had these tilt-up sides. It's kind of an interesting design that we could then put this acid-etched brass all over the outside of it and create incredible detail for very little money, because each of these panels is just a repeat of the next panel. So all you had to do was make one panel and then tell the acid-etched brass lab to just make 60 of them. And we'd stick them on plexiglass and put lights behind, and it would give it just a tremendous amount of detail and spectacle without having to really break the bank building miniatures. And you can see that there's only two good sides to this miniature. And we would shoot it multiple times to make it look like there were two buildings and whatever sides we wanted. So you can start seeing the smoke. And then we would put a big white card behind the building and turn the lights in the building off to create a silhouette, which was how we'd pull a mat, so we could create a silhouette of the building in order to composite the buildings against other buildings and against itself and against the background, as you saw in those earlier shots. So one of the really terrific techniques that Richard Urasich worked out was a very masterful way that he invented and we used a lot during Close Encounters, which was ways of shooting a miniature like that, whether it was the mothership or a UFO or whatever, with a bright lens flare on it, and be able to superimpose that object with the lens flare over some other object, over the background here or over a mountain or whatever, and retain the lens flare. Because in a movie like Star Wars, for instance, everything was just either matted in or matted out with sharp edges. There was no subtlety or softness to the blending of imagery. And Richard worked out ways of using the actual original negative as a mask during a positive pass in the optical printer and various densities of low contrast black and white mattes to try to retain the beautiful, delicate filamental elements of lens flares during these composites. This is the larger scale model of the Tyrell pyramid. So you can see it relative to the camera. So this is where the elevators are going up and down. You can see the scale of it with somebody standing there. You see the back side of it with all the fiber optics coming in, the front side with the camera. And there was actually one scene, it's actually in the documentary, but it's not in the movie, where the camera moves right up to that building and there's a little movie inside there. There's one shot where you see it from a farther distance, but there was one shot that Dave did that it goes right up to the window because we actually shot a plate 35 millimeter of the set of the interrogation scene and projected it into that window and moved right up to it. But there was just a little bit of motion. Something went wrong with the camera track and it didn't perfectly align, so it didn't make the cut. But it was a beautiful scene. This is the back side. This is the projector in the back, the fiber optics, the little motors that are running the elevator up and down. This is more what it looks like when we're actually shooting. That's the shot that Dave did where he went right up to that window with this really beautiful Zeiss 40 millimeter Distagon lens. So we found when we built these buildings, and I'll show you some more of this that Dave Driver's going to explain in a minute, but you can see this building right here that Dave will describe. This was in downtown LA. These are the two side buildings of the Tyrell Pyramid sandwiched together to make yet another miniature. And then there was something that was actually a model kit of a Millennium Falcon and other, meaning we just made stuff out of every junk thing we could get. And then to make these things that would replicate what we thought giant screen LED video type monitors on the sides of buildings were actually a kind of a textured surface like those base plates you get for a Lego set with thousands of little bumps on them. And we found this plastic surface. It was an injection molded plastic piece. And we sprayed it with silver paint and then put black paint on some of them to look like bad bulbs, and then projected 35 millimeter movies. So a shot like this is actually maybe 7 different exposures to get the city, and then just the spinner itself is probably another 6 or 7 exposures, and then those are matted together. This is one shot of a rooftop scene that didn't make the cut in the movie. I can't even remember what the scene was, but there were a few things that we shot that didn't get into the movie. And then I'll get back to a little bit of the live action. This is the Bradbury building in LA, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. And we just recently, when this documentary and the re-release was finished, there was a party held in this building. There was quite a trip because we put some smoke in, or the people that held the party put some smoke in. They had beams of light coming down. We're all having cocktails and food in the Bradbury building to celebrate the final cut of the movie. But here's the inside of the spinner, which was kind of a half set of the cockpit. Pretty complicated bit of shooting. You see a big screen back here, which would be one of our effect shots being projected onto the screen while we're shooting inside here and spritzing water on the plexiglass and getting a pretty deep atmospheric look. And then these screens for video and rear projection of the readouts. So here you can see a movie being projected back here, which is already pre-composited and now going to be seen through the window, which is going to further distort it. And it was pretty successful. Dave Dreyer and Dave Stewart really did an incredible job on this. So the spinner interior, this was an early test. You can see Harrison is kind of skeptical about this whole thing. But we wanted to make sure that he fit in, and his head didn't hit the ceiling, and the seats were at the right height, and the sight lines would be right. And they were starting to work on this weird control system for how the spinner gets flown by Eddie Olmos. What it would look like out the spinner from a point of view inside, like you just saw in some of those earlier shots, where the readouts would go here and here and here, and the control systems. And then you'll see out here that these bumps, which are these big wheel wells out in front, are actually there on the physical full-scale spinner, but Ridley decided to leave them out. So in the composites, they're gone in order to give a better view, and no one seems to criticize that you don't see the wheel wells out there. So this was one of Sid's drawings that kind of led to this whole design concept, and I'll get you a little more of a clip about this whole scene. So that's how you scavenge junk to make a movie low budget, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I think it's a lot of fun. So here's a shot, what it would look like, a composited shot in the movie, which has a spinner outside, all these buildings outside, smoke, rain, spritz on the plexiglass, rear projection, video monitors, really pretty nice looking stuff. And I'll show you a little sequence of what that looks like finished in the movie. So we didn't have enough ceiling height in our building to get the camera up over these miniatures high enough to get a shot like that. So a lot of this sequence was shot with virtually all the buildings tipped over at about 45 degrees. It was a really cumbersome thing, but it was really great because you could go in, shoot this building, all lit up as a miniature, but then behind it we put a big white card so we could create an edge between that and the buildings behind. And then that would give an edge so we could have other little animated spinners going behind that edge. And the spinners would be shot as either animated slot tricks on an animation stand or all kinds of other things. So you see little lights moving way off in the distance, which gives a tremendous amount of scale in shots like this. And then here's the spinner in the shop. You see all this acid etched brass back here? You got to do a little forensic analysis of what's really going on in this shop because you see bits and pieces of all of it, but that's the spinner model. A little model of Harrison Ford getting his eye bored out. Here's the spinner shell being fabricated. The exterior and little actuators inside for various moving parts. And here's the spinner pretty much finished with the cover off, the windshield off, before it got its dark paint job because it really wasn't blue like this in the movie. So that's Harrison Ford and Eddie Olmos there. You see all the wires going in for lights on board. And then you can see this is one of the shots where we're pulling a mat off the spinner And in order to get a matte, and if you understand, the matte is either a positive or negative mask in order to put something behind the spinner or in front of the spinner. And we would often just put white tape all over the spinner, very tight, light it flat, so it would become a white silhouette against black in order to get a mask to superimpose it into some other element. And that's the kind of thing it would look like to pull the matte. And then all that tape had to be meticulously removed and cleaned up for the next shot. And so this is how we would go about getting mattes. And sometimes we'd also put a big white card behind a miniature and have the miniature itself become its own matte by putting no lights on the miniature. So here's what it starts looking like when it's starting to get lit up. It's a pretty fantastic miniature. I frankly have no idea where this thing is. I wish I had it. I've done a really bad job of storing a lot of the miniatures from the movies I worked on. So here's a shot, there's a spinner, a spinner, a spinner, a spinner, lights, explosions, Hades landscape. This has got many, many different optical elements going on at once with these mattes where these lens flares and all this soft filamental stuff is all layered together, and it looks really quite beautiful in the movie. There was another miniature, a smaller spinner, like a quarter scale spinner for the long shots. And here's what it starts looking like with the lights starting to work, which is actually those fiber optics coming up from behind and underneath into those lights. And you start getting these really beautiful dimensions in the spinner. So there were a lot of weird, smaller secondary vehicles. This was kind of a flying truck. There was what we call the red car, which was one of those background cars. There was the yellow car, one of the background cars, all kind of rough Sid Mead designs. And then we get to the blimp, which, as I said, was very much using the same techniques as the mothership in Close Encounters, even these spiny things sticking out with fiber optics on them. And so it starts looking like this weird, inflated thing. It's actually a fiberglass model. With all these fiber optics and little grain of wheat light bulbs and surfaces for projecting movies onto them. And so this was another one of those screens like we had on the sides of the buildings of this kind of mottled, dirty, scuzzed up silver surface that we would project these movies onto. So, each shot of the blimp was probably 7 different exposures. One exposure for that movie, one exposure for the movie on the bottom, one exposure for lens flares not in smoke, one exposure for beams of light in smoke, one exposure for the matte of the shape of the blimp, and on and on and on. This shows you the bottom of it with the 2 screens, and they've all been scuzzed up and dirtied up to make it look really, kind of old and aged. And that's one shot not lit for the movie, but with the screen ready to be projected onto. Coca-Cola, Kirin beer. Dave shot all these shots of the geisha women smoking and taking pills, for your off-world excitement and advertising. And then you start getting shots like this, which is more like the composites used in the film. This doesn't have all the exposures yet of all the beams of light, but it is one of the tests of a couple of movies going on here. Pan Am made it again, even after 2001, but still didn't survive. And then you start getting more finished stuff like this with the fiber optics and smoke and density, and it starts becoming pretty magical. And then you get finished shots that start looking more like this with foreground pieces. So this foreground miniature was all shot, and then a big white screen put behind it to be able to pull a matte off the foreground screen. I'll show you a little bit more of that later. And then, shooting the blimp with the camera, motion control on a track. So this Bradbury thing that Dave Dreyer's talking about, this was the ceiling of the building. We had to set up an 8x10 camera on the floor of the building, looking up through 4, 5, or 6 floors of the Bradbury building and shoot this plate to get the filamental design of these mullions of this gigantic skylight and the elevator and everything. And then at night, as he said, we had no crew. So this is actually a long series of time exposures, and I would just yell down, open the shutter, and I'd walk through there and fire off a strobe flash. And I'd say, close the shutter. Then I'd walk over here, open the shutter, fire the strobe flash, fire the strobe flash, fire the strobe flash. And I did that through every floor. So each of these are multiple strobe flashes of one Nikon strobe flash into an 8x10 process plate to get the whole thing, because we had no money. And the whole crew, the live action crew, had all split to go do something else, left us to our own devices to figure out how to light our scene. So you get this kind of a shot where the blimp is actually just on the other side of this big sheet of glass that has this photograph pasted on it with it all cut out. And so you have smoke on the front of the glass, on this side of the glass toward camera, and smoke on the other side of the glass. And so these beams of light are actually hitting the surface of the glass and then penetrating through it and creating these rays of light. And this is all part of my continuing belief that there's certain kinds of miniature photography that far surpass computer graphics in terms of realism and spectacle. So I'm still very much into miniatures, and I use computer graphics a lot, but I use them sparingly. So here's the buildings, the camera rig that Dave was talking about, all these kind of buildings with all this planted on modernization. And here is that shot of the camera. That's the blimp back there. This is the sheet of glass. This is the photograph pasted on the glass and the track to move the camera and move the blimp. And this is all shot in smoke. It's the only photograph we have of this particular exotic setup. That's Dave Stewart, master cinematographer for miniatures and some of these buildings. So you get a little sense of the scale of the buildings. And then you see this whole thing with the buildings tilted, as I was describing, in order to get these down shots looking over the skylight. And it's just a mess. But everything makes sense, and everything is an element. You see big screens like this that could be brought in between the buildings and illuminated in order to create mats and edges for superimposing and compositing. So it was really the smoke that made everything happen. So you can see as you start smoking things up and lighting it, a certain kind of magic starts happening. And Dave Dreyer's going to talk about that, I think, in a minute. Here's the precinct building. That's the one building they were talking about. It's one of the most specifically built and molded buildings because it was kind of a little star of the movie. Dave Stewart starting to shoot for the downtown stuff. You can see the tracks here, the camera moving through these buildings. Now with smoke. And now I'm going to get to the matte painting part of the movie. This is a 65 millimeter, what we call a bipack camera here. It has film running through it, but it also has a matte film running through it. So there's two pieces of film sandwiched together going through the camera while it's photographing through all these layers, various masks that could be moved up and down and left and right, lights on foreground pieces, and then big lights back here and cooling fans, and then these frames where we could put a painting or a painting in front of a painting to create these matte paintings that would be superimposed against the live action shooting for any shot that we would call a lock-off shot. When the camera's not moving, you can use a matte painting. Now digitally we would do it. We would have digital matte paintings where you can actually move. But so here's the camera here, camera controller, these frames, and then a painting here. And here's the camera with 65 millimeter double films running through it up to this bipack magazine, its lens, places for filters, and then looking through the layers of planes of openings and glass, and a painting being done here where she's actually projecting through the camera that we could put a light inside the camera and project a negative, align the negative in the camera of some live action shot, project it up onto a big fiber board, masonite board painted white, and trace off where all the edges of the live action, where the live action ended, and where we wanted the matte painting to begin. And so that's a pretty laborious process and requires an extreme alignment process, because that board has to be removed, taken to the matte painting department, where Matthew Jurisic is going to actually do the painting based upon an illustration that Sid Mead has done. And then when he gets done, that painting has to go back into the matte painting device and be perfectly aligned with where it was traced from originally and lined up to the negative. Very laborious and time-consuming process. But you'll see he's painting here, and this was an illustration that Sid might have done. This is his little lab. And Matthew, who is no longer working, but he was a master at this technique of painting to dupe stock. And I think I explained this in one of the clips. I won't go into it now. Maybe it'll come up in some of the video. But I'm going to show you what the process looks like when we're shooting. So here's the downtown street in LA in front of the Bradbury building with all these special prop pieces put in front. But there's no special effects here. But there are prop lights, prop monitors, foreground props that kind of set the tone of this futuristic seat and the police cars and things like that. And then that's the shot with a painting added to it, but without all the other moving lights and added elements that we're going to add later, which get you to something that looks more like this. So this is the matte painting for that shot I showed you a minute ago. So it filled in that whole skyline and added additional light to the standing light that was in the foreground, and then it added additional light to one of the street lights in the foreground. And you'll see in the early version, if you actually look at this particular shot, there's a bus that goes right by here, and it passes behind that light. We made a mistake. It was fixed in the Blu-ray version, but it's one of the mistakes that actually got through that we didn't notice. So here's Rocco, who's a young guy, doing one of the paintings. And then here's Sid Mead's illustration of how to, create this downtown LA street with all this stuff in the background, which you actually don't see in any of the downtown streets. We didn't need it. But these weird vehicles and all this neon. In order to save money, they actually bought or either rented, I can't remember, tons of neon that was left over from One from the Heart, which was this, downtown Las Vegas. And they took the neon, turned it inside out, upside down, made it look Chinese and Asian, but just had to basically clutter up what was an existing downtown New York street on the Warner Brothers lot and try to make it into this Blade Runner space. It was a very congested set. It looks really fantastic in the movie. All these vehicles had to be built, and a lot of smoke and a lot of rain, and really pissed everybody off that it was such a dismal movie, all being shot at night in rain and smoke. And it really angered a lot of people. That was one of the reasons why the whole shoot was so difficult. But these real props were fantastic, and you'll see a little clip I'm going to show you in a minute where you see that when these windows open up and when this thing actually moves, it really looks junky because it's just fiberglass and metal and doesn't really fit together perfectly and jiggles. And so you had to cut around the shortcomings of some of these miniatures, some of these set pieces. And then this shot was never planned for the movie. Richard Jurisic talked them into doing it when we were there that night when they were doing the big leap across the buildings, and we added this matte painting here. I don't have any more detail on this shot, but it was kind of a surprise to everybody that we'd have a shot looking straight down. And then there was this rooftop sequence which had matte paintings out here, but this was one of the matte paintings that Sid designed, and when we did it, Ridley felt that this was really distracting. You were suddenly seeing out to this huge kind of world that you'd never seen before. It was kind of different from Hades, and so that was thrown out and replaced by a more claustrophobic downtown, more like the miniature sets. So that's the end of my presentation, and we can go right into Q&A, and I'd be happy to talk about anything you want to ask.
Okay, we have a question.
Thank you for being here in Toronto. Last night and tonight was fantastic. Also, thank you for Silent Running, and thank you for Brainstorm. I love
Thank
that
you.
movie.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we bring the house lights up in here?
I wanted to ask yesterday, so I'm glad I have a chance tonight. Although it's clear your feelings about miniature over computer modeling, but I wanted to ask you, have you seen Avatar? And can I get you to come over to that side just a little bit? I mean, you have to admit it was pretty good.
Oh, I think Avatar is an amazing movie. I have nothing against Avatar. I could even show you a whole clip if you want to see it of the making of Avatar that I showed earlier today. I just feel that computer graphics are mathematical algorithms largely. You know, they're polygons, they're shaders, they're lighting cues, and there is a certain kind of synthetic quality to it sometimes, depending upon what you're trying to do. And one of the problems with it is that in order to really go that extra mile with CGI to photorealism, the render time just goes up astronomically, and you can be into like several days to make one frame of film. And it's sometimes much easier and less expensive to do it with miniatures, and sometimes even better photographically or photorealistically to use miniatures. So I like to kind of blend the two. One of the projects I talked about earlier today was the Luxor Hotel project, where we were blending miniatures, full-scale live action, and CGI and digitally compositing with full camera freedom in a three-dimensional world with fisheye lenses for a simulation ride. And it was fantastic. I just loved it. So I'm not really stuck in one or the other, but I am determined to make movies that don't cost $400 million. There's a very few guys can actually, you know, get that budget behind them.
Okay.
Yes.
You talked to, just now you addressed the question of digital effects versus composite effects. I'm over here.
Okay.
And a lot of what you talked about during your presentation was the actual photography, the lenses, the lighting, everything else, which is all analog. Could you address the difference right now? We're seeing a lot of things being shot on technologies like RED, digital SLRs that are HD. Has digital imaging with respect to the live work caught up to film in your estimation? And what are its benefits or a film?
Yes
versus
and no. It's a complicated question because I'm completely committed to digital imaging and digital compositing. I don't use film anymore. I have no interest in using film anymore. I have no interest in suffering through these incredibly laborious matte processes that we had to do optically in an optical printer. It's really time-consuming and difficult and limiting. So that question leads to a whole bunch of other issues which have to do with resolution, bit depth, dynamic range, frame rate, brightness of projection, and in 3D we're seeing 4-foot Lamberts, which I'm really annoyed by. We've got to get 3D movies brighter again, like a 3D TV, which we just been playing with at our place, which is spectacular because it's bright and colorful. And you don't get color saturation at 4-foot Lamberts in a movie theater. So it's a moving target right now. I think the industry is in this tumultuous transition from film to video. Some people are still shooting film, which is fine. Some people are shooting digitally with RED cameras or Genesis camera, or the new Arri Alexa camera is really kind of a super winner right now. It has more bit depth than almost any camera. I've been shooting recently on Terry Malick's Tree of Life film with the Phantom camera and starting to shoot at 4K at 1,000 frames a second. And I've been doing a bunch of experiments with my old show scan process, which was 60 frames, 70 millimeter. We're now experimenting with a digital version of that, shooting at 120 frames a second. And we're in the process right now rigging up projectors that can project at very high frame rates to see what that looks like and what that feels like, if that's an acceptable texture for a movie. So I could go on and on about it. I hope that answers part of your question. I do use a digital SLR right now. It's really fun, cheap, inexpensive. It's so empowering that you can buy like a Canon 5D Mark II or a 7D or whatever, dump the compact flash cards into this laptop. I have got Final Cut Pro, and I can make a whole movie in my bedroom or go on location. And I'm doing this now. I've been shooting a lot of stuff and a lot of testing just to experiment with it. And it's so enabling because one of the next little projects I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the less expensive Canon cameras, which I think is the T2i or something. I'm going to tear it apart. I'm going to pull it completely apart and pull all the wire out of it and get to the sensor. Because I'm kind of fearless when it comes to mechanical engineering and optical engineering. And we're in this time now where you can actually build your own camera using a certain CCD sensor, a certain processor, certain electronics, and start building new kinds of cameras yourself out of components off of consumer products. It's an amazing time. So for filmmakers, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. First of all, I'd just like to reiterate what the gentleman said earlier. Thank you so much for all the fantastic work you've done, whether it's the Light Tunnel 2001 to making Blade Runner so good that we're talking about it 30 years after the fact almost.
Yeah, right. 45.
Yeah. My question to you then, last year on the internet, it was rumored that Ridley Scott or Tony Scott was going to be involved in a prequel, something called Purefold. I was wondering if you have any inkling as to a possible sequel, whether you would be involved in one if there was, and just out of curiosity, who you would like to see involved in it, actor-wise or director-wise.
I haven't been approached about it. I haven't spoken to anybody about it. It may or may not happen. I'm not, at this point in my life, at all interested in providing visual effects for somebody else's movies. Although if Ridley called me or Tony called me, I would say, sure, I'd be happy to throw in my 2 cents and suggest this or that as ways to do it. So I don't know anything about sequels or prequels to this movie or casting. There's a really funny thing in the Blu-ray of this movie where one of the scenes where Harrison is in a kind of a shop, and he's trying to get some information from one of the shopkeepers, and they had to change the dialogue so the lip sync doesn't work. So they rephotographed Harrison Ford's son, just the lower part of his face, and placed it onto Harrison's face digitally with the proper sync, with the proper dialogue. So we're in this really weird world where you can make anything out of anything.
Yes.
Hi, over here. It's a pleasure to be again. I was here last night and had a great time. I wanted to ask you, I mean, when we're doing 3D films today, whether animated or a mix of live action, what can we do today to take it to the next level, like the way you did it in 2001, where you had all these limitations, we're always limited. But what is it that we can do today in the next 2 years with what we have today? That's my first question. And the second one is, where's the plexiglass monolith? Because you never told us last night.
The plexiglass monolith that was not used in 2001 is at St. Catherine's Dock in London on the front of a bank building, Barclays Bank, I believe, with the Queen's seal now etched into it. Looks like glass. It's horizontal. That's all I know. I've never actually seen it myself, but I have a photograph of it somewhere. But in terms of where to go next, that's one of the big things that I'm really working on, because I've been very, very interested in pushing the cinema into more and more spectacular territory as much as I can. And so I had a lot to do with my show scan film process. We were shooting 60 frames a second in 70 millimeter. Made quite a number of films. It was very successful, but it never really got market traction, and I couldn't make Brainstorm, which was designed to be photographed and projected in show scan. I couldn't get the industry to put in new 70 millimeter projectors. I couldn't get everybody to commit to making movies in this process. It was a kind of a catch-22 that wasn't going to go anywhere. But right now, to answer your question, these kind of digital projectors that are being installed all over the world to enable 3D can also do 2D or 3D, but they're projecting at 144 frames a second all the time. People don't know that, but that's the frame rate that the DLP chips are oscillating at. Because for a 3D movie, it has to have 72 flashes in the right eye, 72 in the left eye, and it's actually shifting back and forth 144 times a second. So there's no reason why we can't feed a projector 48 frames a second, 60 frames a second, 72 frames a second, 120, 144. And this is the area that I'm going to start experimenting with. I'm actually working on it right now with various companies, both on the camera side and the projector side, because I'm a big believer in immersive cinema. I'm very frustrated by small, flat, rectangular screens. And I actually have a design for a cinema format that would be a hemispherical screen. It's like a quarter dome of a planetarium. So the field of view is like bigger than Cinerama, much higher, very high frame rate, very high brightness, and in 3D. And I'm doing those experiments in the next few months. So I don't know where that's going to lead. I don't know where the industry is going to go. But you know, one of the other aspects of that is that IMAX has left this gaping hole in the industry because IMAX committed to 2K dual Christies for their digital format, which is like a fraction of the quality of the original 15 perforation 70 millimeter IMAX format. And so they're making smaller theaters, and they're really kind of bastardizing their own, the public's perception of what IMAX means or is or could be, in the same way that Cinerama destroyed itself over time by backtracking from 3 projectors and giant 90-foot screens to smaller screens and 70 millimeter film. So it's a moving target right now because we're in this transition from from film to digital. It'll be interesting to see what happens, or whether 3D has the real traction.
Yes.
How you doing? Thank you for being here. Over here.
Oh, there he is.
Yellow shirt, pretty obvious.
You're in the dark.
I am indeed, yeah. And I have been on this particular question for a long time. The 12-year-old me watched Harrison explore that photograph. I'm still watching it and wondering, did you conceive of that? Was it you and your crew that conceived of that moment in the film?
No, that was Ridley's idea. And it actually went through various iterations because I shot a whole sequence of those photographs. It was a kind of an interesting moment trying to do this Vermeer look. And it was a moment with Rutger Hauer at a table. And we wanted to make it look like a snapshot where he had actually just moved and part of it was blurred. And so I had to shoot hundreds of photographs, and I would say, okay, go. And he would go like that, and I'd shoot it again and move the camera and shoot it again. He was really tired by the time I was done with him because I was shooting hundreds of blurred photographs that had to look identical. They went back in later and did that woman at the end and replaced parts of that scene and did a lot of image processing and then kind of blue flashing and the graphics that were all animated effects. So that, you know, all these things go through various iterations over time. I hope that answers your question.
Next question there.
Yeah, hi. Thanks again. You talked about during your presentation certain effect shots like the flyover of the police precinct and the blimp overhead of the Bradbury building standing out as being stars of the movie. How conscious are you during a production, particularly one as limited in budget as Blade Runner, of shooting for something on that kind of iconic quality, and how much are you just trying to get the work done?
We didn't have a clue. Blade Runner was kind of a filler project for me because I was actually concentrating on Brainstorm at the time, and Dave Dreyer took over and really finished all the work on Blade Runner for us. I wouldn't say that we had any notion that Blade Runner was going to become what it became over time. You know, the movie was received very, very badly. It got terrible reviews. Ridley was freaked out. The studio was freaked out. They tacked on that stupid upbeat ending, which they got rid of later. They took out the voiceover. I mean, the documentary tells a lot of that story, the dynamics that were going on in the movie. But on 2001, I had a buzz the entire time. I could tell the entire time, at least from my point of view, that we were making some amazing masterpiece, and I was working with one of the most brilliant filmmakers of all time. So I had a little different feeling during 2001 than I had during Blade Runner, which was very fraught.
Next question.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just wanted to say thank you for being a part of my childhood. You were a big part of it when I was a preteen. My question is in regards to Brainstorm, if you don't mind discussing. I was wondering how you dealt with directing that film, especially given the challenges that you faced.
Well, I really loved directing Brainstorm, and I really like directing. And Brainstorm was designed to introduce the show scan film process. And it was conceived as this very immersive giant screen, 70 millimeter, 60 frame experience, which I couldn't make happen, so it was a very big disappointment for me. But part of the answer to your question is that I like directing a lot from my own experience, even going back to Silent Running when I got the opportunity to direct Silent Running, and I kind of created the story and wrote the final draft of the screenplay, directed this movie. I had never been to film school. I didn't have a clue about what I was doing or what I was getting into, but the crew liked me, and the cinematographer, Charlie Wheeler, and the lighting guy, and the producer, we all got along just great. And in about 3 days, I figured out all the basics of cinematographic language, of master shots and two shots and stage lines and over the shoulders and singles and everything. And we kind of made this little movie and shot Silent Running in 32 days and a very low budget, and then added the effects, which were very, very simple compared to 2001. And so I got my feet wet as a director, but then I also started getting my feet wet with Hollywood issues and having the studio dump this movie with no advertising campaign as an experiment, a social experiment. And so I have long, long stories. The Brainstorm story was very big because that was my second feature that I was going to direct. I was doing these other films for various strategic reasons, A, to make money, B, to get my hands on 70 millimeter cameras and optical printers for Brainstorm. So I was doing Close Encounters and Blade Runner kind of as a service business. I had a great relationship with all these directors because they admired me as a director. They knew I wasn't just an effects guy, I was a director. So they could turn over huge hunks of their movie and not worry about it. They knew I could deliver it for them, and so I was highly trusted by them. But when Brainstorm was nearly finished, you probably know the story, that Natalie Wood died in a tragic drowning accident. The studio canceled the movie. They wanted to throw it in a vault forever or burn the negative or whatever. Everybody got fired within 3 hours of her dying. And it was a huge tragedy. And it changed my life because I witnessed from a very lonely point of view what it's like to be a director trying to get your movie made against almost insurmountable odds and the opposition of the studio. And I got the movie finished finally with money from Lloyd's of London, and everybody wanted to finish the movie, and the whole crew came back and the cast came back. But I decided after that I had to leave Hollywood altogether and completely abandon my directing career because it was so bad, so horrible, so frightening. I was afraid for my life that I decided not to direct movies and went into these alternative things and started doing the Back to the Future ride, World's Fair films, expos, and kind of alternative cinema projects, and moved from LA to Massachusetts. And only just recently have I finally gotten over my scar tissue from my Hollywood experiences. And I'm trying to figure out how to make what I think would be really interesting kind of science fiction fantasy films, which I like to make. And I'm a particular aficionado of space movies and space stories and the universe. And I'm developing projects to use new virtual sets and all these new blended miniatures, computer graphics, digital compositing, high frame rates. I really want to explore the next phase of what I think the cinema can be. But I have to come at it with an approach that can circumvent Hollywood. And that's Hollywood's a big name, but I think that the major studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Columbia, you name it, are basically white elephant dinosaurs that have got to get out of the way. Because anybody who makes a movie is just creating fodder for their money mill. And very few people ever see profits from movies. It's just a way to pay all the distributor costs, all the studio overhead, lavish limousines, giant offices, stupid uses of money. When we're in a digital age where it's possible now to get your digital movie made in your garage directly to audiences digitally through electronic distribution. That's going to be the next phase. I think the movie business is going to go through a big transformation similar to what the music industry recently went through. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I've had nothing but bad experiences, including this recent experience you might have heard about of this documentary about 2001 for Warner Brothers. And we developed this whole thing. I spent a lot of money on it, spent almost a year of my life on it, and then they just canceled it for no reason. Thoughtlessly, cruelly, blatantly. I just couldn't believe anybody would treat me like that. After I had all these bad experiences already, they just proved once again that there's something fundamentally wrong out there.
So, excuse me, hello again. I was here early this morning.
Where are we? Oh, there.
I'm the French guy, if you remember.
Right,
me. This morning you mentioned a documentary about Cinerama, and you never said the title. So, do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I can even show it to you if you want, because we're actually under time here. I don't know what Jesse wants to do, but it's a wonderful documentary that I found inadvertently in the boxed set, the boxed Blu-ray set of the remastering of How the West Was Won. Because they took the original Cinerama 3-strip movie and blended all the joints between the three cameras and made two versions. One was rectangular, and then one was what they call smile box with this cool curve like a Cinerama screen. And in that was this documentary about the entire history of what came before Cinerama, how Cinerama emerged from this kind of flight gunnery simulation training system, and then all the issues that emerged during the days of Cinerama, trying to move from making documentary travelogues to making dramatic theatrical films like How the West Was Won and The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, which were the two last dramatic films made in that process. And it's really interesting because it talks about stuff that's very salient today. The cumbersomeness of the cameras, the difficulties that the directors had of working in a new medium that was a different language, a different aspect ratio, a different kind of immersive editorial and photographic process. And so I recommend, this is about a 2-hour documentary, I think, called The Cinerama Experience. So you'll find it in that box set. It's a terrific movie. And another situation where the poor guy who made this labor of love for 8 years, finding all this stuff about the history of Cinerama, got completely screwed by the studio and never made a dime.
Yes. Okay, I was at the presentation earlier today, and I understand seeing this tonight why Kubrick destroyed all his models for his films, so he wouldn't find them in your other films later.
Right.
But my question is, I don't know if I have a blur in my mind, but I saw your name on the script. It was Always, directed by Spielberg. If you wrote that film, and did you have a lot of scripts like that you wrote or that are hanging in your...
My name is not on that script.
No?
I don't know where you got that idea. I had nothing to do with it. So...
It was a blur.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Hi. Ooh, that's loud. Sorry. One of my favorite stories about, I guess, part of your history in special effects is when you took over the special effects for Star Trek: The Motion Picture from Robert Abel and Associates. Rumor has it you looked at the model that Magicam had built and you said, this doesn't look right, it needs more detail, and it's got to look like an ocean liner in space. Were you personally responsible for the sort of the self-illumination of the ship?
Oh, yeah.
And can you just talk a bit more about that?
Well, in the early days of Star Trek, which were television budgets and, you know, low budgets, and the models of the Enterprise were really kind of crude, and there was just a standard photographic process that would be used in a movie like that, as well as Star Wars and other movies, where there'd be a key light and a fill light, and you were done with that. I thought that for Star Trek, which was going to go way out into space, way away from the sun, way away from our galaxy, into uncharted territory, et cetera, that there would be no valid justification for a key light, fill light kind of relationship on the Enterprise. And I wanted it to look really beautiful, so I had it completely rebuilt and relit. And it was based on this idea that major aircraft of today, they have lights on board the plane that shine from the wings onto the fuselage. They have lights that shine from the rear elevators up to the tail to light up the logo of the airline on the tail. I thought, well, if the Enterprise could kind of light itself up, and there seemed to be some natural justification for that, you could make this beautiful thing that had no key light and no fill light at all. It would be self-illuminating. So that was one of the things I brought to it. And Bob Abel's company had this they had these completely outrageous ideas. I can talk about it a little more frankly since Bob is no longer alive. And I had to take over all these transitional ideas that they had at that time, because it was the beginning of the world of computer graphics and digital control of photography. And they had this concept for Star Trek, which was that they were going to previs all the shots with Evans and Sutherland wireframe computer graphics, work the shots out, pre-program them, create a file that would control the camera or miniature movement, send that file down to the stage, and somehow the guys on the stage were going to execute that shot. Well, it was a completely faulty idea, because they hadn't programmed in the fact that the camera had a magazine on it, and they didn't realize that the magazine was going to hit the model, and all this stuff was wrong, and nothing worked. But that your sense of scale and movement and lighting and perspective requires that you see the detail and scale of either a full-scale set or a miniature or something, and then you move appropriately for that. You can't just zoom through it with computer graphics. You get the completely wrong idea. And this was happening in the same way in the early days of Avid editing systems, where movies were being reduced to small television screens and editors were making aesthetic editorial judgments based on a small CRT monitor, when in fact the movie was this big. And you could make huge editorial mistakes if you're not seeing the movie in the medium that you're shooting in. And this was very common with IMAX. If you reduced an IMAX film down to a 35 millimeter print and cut it and then put it back on the big screen, the edits were extremely disturbing. So I had to take over that movie and just completely redesign and go back to more classic techniques of miniatures and miniature photography and all the things that I'd learned on other movies I'd worked on, and just completely start over. And the reason I accepted the job to work on Star Trek, which I did not want to work on, was to get out of my contract at Paramount, because I was under exclusive contract to them, and they wanted to bury me. I invented show scan, simulation rides, interactive video games, and Magicam all in 1 year, and they just wanted to bury all of it and play like it never happened. And I was on a 6-year contract, so I was going to see 6 years of my life wasted doing nothing and being paid. And when they got into trouble with Bob Abel and he was making all his mistakes, they begged me to come in and fix it for him. I said, I will fix it for you if I'm out of here. The day I deliver this movie, I am out of here. And that's the deal we made. And that's why I did it.
Yes.
And I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, too.
Mr. Trumbull, thank you again for your visit, and thank you for advice from me yesterday concerning stop motion.
Right.
As far as the industry goes, it's gone from these big effects houses like ILM and Entertainment Effects to these little boutique outfits that don't have model shops or they're self-contained different units. What are your feelings on the shift in the visual effects industry, administration-wise? Do you think it was higher quality and better effects when it was kept under one roof, or do you think it's better off with these little boutique operations that are operating now?
I don't think there's any super answer to that question. For my taste, I think of a movie as a passionate, creative work of art, and I like being involved in every aspect of it, whether it's the live action, the miniatures, the sets, the lighting, or whatever, and seeing it all the way through. We're in this age now where, and I saw this coming, by the way, when I turned over Entertainment Effects Group to Richard Edlund, and I kind of moved on, and he was trying to make this transition into computer graphics. That A, it was unknown territory, B, computer graphics at that time, you know, one workstation with a good functional, what was the name of the company that made the first? SGI workstations. You were into about $75,000 per person capital investment. to get started in that computer graphics. So a lot of the effects companies actually went bankrupt. There was a huge shakeout. Some of them didn't make it, including EEG, which turned into Boss Film, did not survive. It was a very tumultuous time. But now we're in this time where people are just so bought into computer graphics that you could do virtually anything that, and I don't believe that's true, that they abandoned the miniature departments, didn't want to carry the overhead of miniature guys, and they thought they could just do everything with computer graphics. And I don't believe that that's true, and I don't think that's really the answer. But I also believe that even for young filmmakers or very low-budget projects, you can do it yourself. Making miniatures is a hell of a lot of fun. My experience with the guys that I've found in my life who build miniatures are the happiest people I've ever met, because they're in like Santa's toy shop all the time. And I've just been doing some experiments myself because I'm very comfortable with tools, and I have a complete workshop at my home studio where I have, band saws and lathes and mills, drill presses, and metal shop and a machine shop and a wood shop. And I just bought a thing called a ShopBot, which is a CNC-controlled milling machine that's very inexpensive. And I'm making miniature parts myself in my garage that look fantastic and better than anything I've ever seen anybody make with computer graphics. Cheap, by myself. I'm saying, well, you could make a movie with, 5 or 6 people. It would look pretty good if you can just be ingenious and find that sweet spot between computer graphics and compositing, and you can still do a lot of it on your laptop. I do it myself. I've been shooting with this Canon 7D. I've been shooting miniatures. I could show you some stuff from the other show from earlier today if you want. What's going on there? Want to keep talking?
Next question.
Like many people here, I'm finding this very inspirational, and I wondered if we could go back to Blade Runner for a moment. What was it like when you saw the elements that you created combining with the amazing sound and amazing music? When you saw that for the first time, what was that like emotionally?
Well, I thought it was great, and I thought that the Vangelis score was fantastic. And I subsequently met him and went to Greece, and I have a kind of a nice ongoing friendship with him. He's an amazing guy. And that's covered a little bit in the documentary about the making of Blade Runner, what he did at his studio. He had several studios, he had one in Athens and one in New York, and I don't know where else. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing came together just so beautifully because there really aren't that many effect shots in Blade Runner. About less than 1/3 of the number of shots as we had in Close Encounters or that George had in Star Wars, for instance, because the Blade Runner budget was so low. But the integration of the effects with the photographic style of all these beams of lights and smoky sets and dripping water made it all seem of a piece, So it didn't require that many effect shots to pull it all together as one really smoothly contiguous, really gritty, futuristic, dystopian view that I thought was really beautiful and spectacular. It was really disappointing that it wasn't well received. But my opinion at the time was, and it's still kind of true, is that movies that are upbeat do tend to do much better in the box office than movies that are dystopian. I mean, people just don't want to be bummed out that much. And so there will always be a difference, even if a Blade Runner came out now, and even Blade Runner came out in the year that E.T. came out, and E.T. just took away the box office because it was like really cute and funny and charming, and people loved it, and you could bring your families. Well, you didn't bring your kids to Blade Runner,
My parents brought their kid to Blade Runner. Yes.
That's why you're so distorted.
You got me there, Doug.
I'm personally very interested in following you as of this point, and when you're saying you're working on these new technologies. Is there a way that we can follow you so that we can see what you're up to in the near future?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep a presence on my website, which you can find pretty easily because it's myname.com. And I've been making a big effort with this website to try to put as much of the stuff that I put in these keynote presentations on my site so that people can see what I'm up to. And I'll try to keep it current, but you know, I'm have limited amount of time. I don't know how people spend so much time online, blogging and tweeting, and I like to work, and so. If we could get the projector up, I could show you a couple of other little fun things if we're, because it's kind of salient to what we're talking about. Yeah. So I'll try to keep updating it with some of this stuff, and some of this stuff is actually on there now, and some of it will be on there in the near future. But I'm working on this whole idea for some science fiction, spectacular, futuristic space epics that I think I can do quite inexpensively. These are some illustrations that were done for me by Robert McCall, who did the poster for 2001, who died just recently. But this is a movie that's kind of interesting because it's about this huge spacecraft that has giant solar sails, and that's how they get around the universe. And there are these kind of pod-like sets. That's going to be a little set in there, and this whole thing is rotating around to create artificial gravity. And I started toying around with the scene, and Bob did some illustrations, and there's these guys on this spaceship, and they're playing this weird little marble game called Orbit. And the set is there, and it's orbiting around the shell of this ship. And so these are some illustrations that a guy like Bob McCall could do in about an hour, kind of like storyboard drawings. And so I started building my version of what this set might be in my shop. So this is a 4x8 sheet of particle board, some cutout pieces of plywood, some 2-inch and 1.5-inch PVC piping, and some 1/4-inch threaded rod, and blah, blah, blah. And pretty soon you start building a miniature that doesn't look too bad. And I built this, my son and I built this together in about a week with just 2 people, and kind of got this set going. And then we started lighting it because it's going to be rotating, so the key light's going to be rotating 360 degrees around this set. I thought, well, this is the thing I'm looking for in this particular little experiment. So this is shooting with my Canon 7D motion control. There's no motion going on here, and there's obviously no people in it. But it was a lighting experiment to see, well, what it's like to have a moving key light on a miniature, and how that might relate to what you could actually do if it were computer graphics, and could you even do this with computer graphics? We did this for like no money. This is a garage job. And then we started experimenting with 3D. I built this stereopticon with 2 high-definition monitors. You can see where some of the guys who work with me in the lab were superimposing themselves with a green screen into that set. And we were shooting it in 3D and looking at it with these first surface mirrors and kind of experimenting with 3D without any glasses or anything, that you could get the perfect unobstructed 3D view of this scene. And it's kind of part of the experiments that I'm doing, and I'm using this zero-gravity boom that I used for Pooh, which is this thing I built at my studio. There's a camera here. It's all carbon fiber, and it's self-supporting, and it floats freely in 3D space. I could go on about this forever, but it's a thing that I'm working on now, which a guy named Scott Losmonde at Portajib in LA makes really neat, low-cost jib products. And so we took that patent of mine of a zero-gravity boom, and he's building it out of Portajib Explorer jib components, so that people in kind of the college level or film startup level, you could buy this whole device for about $5,000, and it will do virtual set production. It'll be fully encoded with shaft encoders on every axis of motion, feeds into a computer, and what you see in the camera viewfinder is your finished composite shot with some software that you can put in your laptop called Brainstorm. And this is my Canon 7D with my little cheapo monitor and my Zacuto follow focus. This whole thing is probably $3,000 worth of gear, and it shoots every bit as good as a RED camera in terms of actual image quality and bit depth and everything else. So I'm not going to go on, but I just wanted to I'm so excited about how enabling digital technologies are, because you can buy a laptop and some software and Photoshop or After Effects or whatever you want and an inexpensive camera and make a movie yourself for like no money. But you gotta figure it out. You know, you gotta, I think you can, once you set your mind to it and you enable yourself to not be afraid to build a miniature or shoot a live action and cut part of it out, put in a painting to replace part of it. It's not that hard. Maybe it's harder for you than it is for me, I don't know, but.
I'm going to go with yes
Seems
on
very
that
natural.
one. Yes.
Just wondering if you could talk a bit about how you work with a director. I mean, they're all different. Some are more experienced than others in terms of visual effects. So how does the process work from the very beginning of when you start off working on the idea? How much input do you have? How much do they tell you what they want?
My experience is that it's very collaborative, and I've had just wonderful relationships with virtually every director I've worked with when I'm supplying their special effects for their movie, whether it was Kubrick or Robert Wise or Steven Spielberg or Ridley, because they trust me. I mean, they know that I'm not stupid, and they know that I'm probably going to be able to think of something that they couldn't think of. That's my job. I feel that my job has always been to think outside the box, to approach any challenge with new eyes and try to bring something to the screen that no one's ever seen before. They know that's what I do. And so all these relationships I've had with directors have been really good because they're very supportive, they're eager for me to do my thing, and I get a lot of headroom and freedom to do my thing as long as it's within their budget. There's always some horrified producer who thinks that the budget's too big. But I think in terms of the production value that we've been able to deliver to these movies for really pretty reasonable budgets have transformed these movies into special movies because we brought something to it that no one had ever seen before. And there's always hassles with the production manager or the studio or the budget or whatever, and it's always a pain in the neck. And you always have to fight to get a little extra, to go the extra mile. But if you do, you can make something special. So that's kind of what I've done. And I've done it for very strategic reasons. I don't feel that I'm a special effects guy. And I kind of am, and I have, but I think of myself as a film director because I write, I produce, I direct, I shoot, I edit, and I'm a geek. And so I really think we're in the period of enabling that kind of almost one-man filmmaking now, which I'm very excited about myself. I'm not going to do movies by myself, but I know that it's now possible to make really good movies with a very small group of people by just being smart and inventive and creative and dipping into all the little things. You just get yourself a subscription to Cinefex and you'll find everything you need to know and make it yourself.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for your presentations. You've obviously put a lot of work into them. They're fantastic. I hope this isn't a silly question. You've spent a lot of your life visualizing the future. Do you have any thoughts about humanity's future? Are you an optimist or maybe not so much? I don't know.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think I really like envisioning the future, and I like thinking about it a lot. And I had this moment a few years ago, it was probably about 15 years ago, and I said to myself, God, I've made my whole career has been based on the future and space and science fiction and a lot of aliens and alien contact stories, whether it was Star Trek or Close Encounters or 2001. And I said to myself, well, is there anything to this all? And is there really a true alien story? Have we been visited? Are flying saucers real? Et cetera, et cetera. Because nobody believes they're real. I mean, in the entertainment industry, nobody believes there's such a thing as UFOs for real. They think I'm nuts. What? Yeah. A couple of more questions, I think.
Yeah, we have time for two more. Who's got a mic? Right there. Yep, you first, and then you.
Is this? Okay, it is working. Just regarding the effects and the cost and everything. In 2001, you had a big budget, but you had really primitive equipment, but it looked really good regardless. Blade Runner, you had, well, I wouldn't say a bad budget, but like for Hollywood, like $2 million is still a fair bit of money, especially compared to like, you know, indie filmmaking and all that today. But you were able to make some really convincing effects despite the lower budget, but you had better technology. So, and now in your basement, you can, you know, make pots and pans and take like stuff from Home Depot and make really convincing effects using cheap digital cameras. So,
Exactly.
is it better to have like a big budget but bad equipment, or is it better to have like a good, like a really advanced, fancy equipment but a really crappy budget? Which one gets more convincing to like technically, not really artistically, because obviously like the smaller budget you'll be able to get exactly what you want. Like
I don't know. There's probably a sweet spot somewhere between the two worlds, but my feeling is that you're going to do much better if you're struggling and you don't have enough money, but you're not on anybody else's radar screen. Because I can't imagine the pressure that any director has to go through to be the summer blockbuster that's going to make or break our major studio. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be part of that. I don't like that pressure. There are very few directors who do like to do it. There are a few who do. It takes a big toll on them. But the movies that come out of it are really, I wouldn't call them classic movies. They're blockbuster that'll, you know, go and go away. I like works of art. I'd rather do something small and intimate that's my personal, passionate idea, even if the budget's small. So, I mean, this UFO thing that's my budget. I can't get much farther without some budget from a production company, but I'd rather it be such a low amount of money that it's just pin money for them and they're not worrying about it and they'll leave me alone. So it's something like that. I don't like a lot of pressure from people expecting me to save them.
This is perfect, because you've just summed up the entire dichotomy of these 2 days of presentation. On the one hand, you have the personal, the art, the film as personal expression, and then on the other hand, we want to have 150-foot screens and 17.2 sound and 3D or 4D and scent vision or whatever we want to do. The dynamic or dichotomy or false dichotomy between film as exhibition and film as art. I'm wondering if you can talk about where on that divide you see your own work going in the future and where you see the future of cinema to go, whether or not we're only going to have Transformers and Michael Bay bullshit, or whether something like Casablanca as science fiction is going to be made even if the technology doesn't allow it to be exhibited in the format that you would want it to be.
Well, what I'm doing right now is, first of all, I stay away from Hollywood pretty much. I don't expect anything to happen there. I've tried so many years to get traction there, and they don't understand what I'm talking about. The people who are in charge of the movie business have no imagination whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. And I'm trying to find right now independent money in interesting places like Denver, Colorado, very high technology communities, more computer programmers and software engineers per capita than anywhere in the world are in Boulder, strangely enough. And it's Ball Aerospace and very smart communities, great educational systems, very intelligent people. And there may, in fact, be an investment community there that really gets what I'm trying to do and might get behind it. I don't know. We haven't made any deals yet. I'm talking to several other people about it. But the whole idea of coming up with some new approach to movies that you have a good shot at carrying it through to the public. Because I believe that this whole idea of digital distribution of your little passionate work of art is very feasible to get pay-per-views or set up some kind of a social network kind of thing where people actually become contributors to your vision, and whether they pay 99 cents or $10 or something, you could actually maybe fund a movie. I mean, I was asking some friends this morning, I said, well, you know, what if I went online and I said, here's my vision for my little movie. Would you like to be a sponsor? I don't know. Could I raise $10 or $100 or 10 grand or something? I'd like to explore that territory because I think it'll be very freeing and be part of the way the world really works these days.
I'd be happy to pay for the 2001 documentary. I'll give you $100 right now.
Well, thanks very much. I actually had to get over it because all those rights are tied up at Warner Brothers. So I can't, even if I found money, I can't make that documentary.
But very briefly, your self-funded film is not going to be shown on an IMAX screen. and that is your half of your life has been devoted to giving us magnificent exhibition, and yet the projects don't economically allow for that sort of thing. How do you deal with that?
I'm actually designing a new film medium. And I may be out of my mind, but I've done it before, and it doesn't scare me because I've done, theme park rides and simulators and hemispheric screens and stuff, and I'm actually working on a kind of hybrid technology that is about a quarter dome screen. It's 90 degrees wide. The seating is very confined. It's scalable to any size, so it could be a 50-seat theater, a 100-seat theater, a 500-seat theater. You could fit it into a Walmart or a Kmart or a Space or a warehouse or whatever, and just bypass the movie industry totally. If you could just set this thing up and have a couple of porta potties in the corner, you might be in business. So I want to shoot in 3D. I want to shoot in 120 or 144 frames a second. I want to use my virtual set stuff. I want to make a movie that won't be a blockbuster budget, but I'd like to see if there isn't, in fact, a way to start up a new medium that is parallel to, but outside of, the normal theatrical movie business, which I find frustrating. I don't like small rectangular screens. It's not immersive enough for me. Perfectly good for a lot of other guys, but not for me. So since I did show scan, I've done all these weird things, and I was part of the group of people that took IMAX public. We actually acquired IMAX, went on an IPO roadshow, raised $350 million, and brought IMAX into the commercial marketplace. It's doable. It's a credible idea. We could convince a lot of Wall Street guys that they should put up their money, and we could bring IMAX into the commercial world, which we did. So I know it's feasible, but you got to do these demonstrations. So my next phase is I've got to actually show how this will work and what it will look like, which means I have to shoot a little movie, I have to work out all the cameras, I have to work out the projectors, I have to build the screens, I have to do a sound system. And that's what I'm trying to do right now, because I'm very frustrated that the movie industry hasn't really gone nearly as far as it can. And even IMAX has bastardized itself at 2K and smaller screens, and it's just not okay. We can do much better. So I'm trying. Send your money.
I think you have eager investors in here, Mr. Trumbull. I just want to remind everyone that our new print of 2001: A Space Odyssey opened today. It's going to be running for the next couple of weeks right in the cinema, so please come back and see it. And of course, in just 20 minutes or so, in the theater next door, we'll be running Blade Runner, preceded by La Jetée, a film that highly influenced Blade Runner. And at this point, I would like to, I think I'm speaking for the entire audience, Mr. Trumbull, when I say it's been a remarkable privilege to listen to you the last 2 days, and really inspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Really nice to be here. This is a great place. Thank you for coming.